Hey, how's it going? I'm McCreedy, I'm a musician and I am a longtime fan and friend of Your Spaceship and the Six Set Bro podcast, and today I'm going to talk to you about 5 albums that I can't live without. The first album that I can't live without is an album that came out about 10 years ago, Carrie and Lowell by Sufjan Stevens. This is one of those albums that it just feels like kind of crafts a whole cinematic universe. It feels really mythological. It's this sublime working through of grief after the death of Stephen's mother, and there's something sort of eerily uplifting about it, even though it really deals with a sort of infatuation with death and some very dark topics and some taboo topics. And I think it really pushes the boundaries in terms of textures, and as a musician myself, thinking about how I want to produce music, it really made me think about ambience and kind of how the disturbing things can be beautiful. There's that real kind of focus on the sublime, which I love. So that's the first album I want to highlight. The second album I want to talk about, there's another, I guess, obsession with death, and that is Stranger in the Alps by Phoebe Bridgers. This is Phoebe Bridgers' first album. I could have easily made the argument for Phoebe Bridgers' second album, Punisher, as well, but I think Stranger in the Alps, at the time it came out, I think it really impacted my songwriting. It got me to think about how honest I was being and what I was writing. You know, there are lines in songs like Funeral, Jesus Christ I'm So Blue all the time, that are just so unfiltered and in their honesty and their sort of working through of depression. And it's an album that dips in and out of, again, textures, ambiences, folk sounds, more rocky sounds, and it's one that I still kind of always go back to. Even though I love Punisher, I think Stranger in the Alps is the one that just fits it to the post for me. The third album I want to talk about is Jagged Little Pill by Alanis Morissette. I came to this album late, as in only 3 or 4 years ago, but I know that if I had been a teenager in the 90s, this album would have been my entire religion. I would have had Alanis Morissette posters all over my walls, and I would have done anything to get tickets, maybe even more than the Eras tour. I think this album, again, I think something all these albums that I'm talking about have in common is a real boundary pushing and boundary crossing. This album, I think, changed how women were able to make music, and I think thematically it dealt with some really interesting topics. It dealt with parenting styles, it dealt with growing up in the Catholic Church, with misogyny in the music industry, and again was really experimental in its sound, and I think it paved the way for people like Avril Lavigne and Olivia Rodrigo and Billie Eilish to come through and be these rebel girls for teenage girls to look up to and model themselves on. And with that in mind, the next album I'm going to talk about is actually an album that was released this year, and that is Billie Eilish's Hit Me Hard and Soft. The reason I want to talk about this album is because I think it has a beautiful cohesiveness to it. Everything is linked. It's almost like, again, there's something cinematic. It's almost like a film score. Certain melodic motifs weave in and out of the album, but it does this in a way that crosses genre entirely. You know, some of the songs are more acoustic or folk or ballad, and then others really, they're electronic, they're dance tracks. They're things you would listen to if you were out in Berlin. And I think it's amazing the way that this is woven together in this album. The production is really interesting, and I think that cohesiveness really sticks out to me in this year, because the way that we listen to music now is so based around algorithms, and it's rare that people listen to albums start to finish. And I think that what Billie and Phineas have done with this album is a real push against that. The album sort of begs to be listened to in its entirety, and I think that's what makes it such a good album. The final album I'm going to talk about, I mean, I could talk about Rumours, I could talk about Dark Side of the Moon, but I feel like these are all on everybody's Desert Island albums, so I want to talk about one that would be lesser known, but that is really one of my favourite albums ever, and has shaped so much of, or kind of been the soundtrack to so much of my life the last year and a half, and that is Cerulean by Ken Yates. The album originally came out in 2022, and then he had an extended version in 2023, and most of the tracks on the album have female harmonies from people like Kathleen Edwards, Katie Pruitt, and it's an album about depression, but it has this driving momentum to it. It's one of those albums I think you could put on the car and listen to, and it's so melodic and it's so introspective and reflective, but you know, there's just that beautiful mix of upbeat and more somber tracks, and just the way Ken Yates talks about depression. I think he says, there's a line in a song that says, heaven feels a lot like a high school reunion, what can I do to get out of going? The way that he works metaphors are just beautiful, and you know, it feels like this album kind of oscillates around similar key signatures, similar structures, but I think what I love about Ken Yates is he has a way of making those interesting and really unique, and yeah, it's just an album I've completely fallen in love with. So that's my 5. As I say, there's plenty of others I could talk about, but I think in the interest of wanting to keep this as unique as possible, I've gone for ones that I think are a mix of really what speaks to the present time, what's influenced me, and what I kind of have on rotation and I'm listening to. So yeah, big love to your spaceship.